My guests today are two prominent explorers, researchers, and experimentalists of consciousness, Richard Gordon and Tom Campbell. Thank you for being here today, Richard and Tom. What might a physicist and the founder of a powerful healing modality have in common? Well, their decades of research concluded that consciousness is the fundamental reality and that love is the answer. Isn't that great? Richard Gordon is the founder of Quantum Touch and the author of several books on healing, and his latest book, The Secret Nature of Matter, shows how love and intent operates with consciousness. Tom even wrote a blurb for Richard's book, and it's really telling as he's very impressed by the book. Tom wrote, "It's a delightful read to follow Richard Gordon as he experimentally discovers that consciousness is fundamental, that an intent infused with love serves as the organizing principle of consciousness, and that our so called physical reality is a virtual reality computed by the larger consciousness system." Better yet, Gordon's process provides a scientific evidential path that allows scientists and laymen alike to unequivocally experience for themselves ancient wisdom and spiritual truths that reduce materialism to an irrational belief. What could be more useful and significant than that? Now, Tom Campbell, physicist and consciousness researcher, is the author of My Big Toe, A Theory of Everything. It's big because it unifies the normal and the paranormal, solves the hard problem of physics, your everyday topics, bridges quantum mechanics and relativity, and the my is because it's written entirely from his own experience and experiments. Tom's PhD work was in experimental nuclear physics. Good toes have few assumptions. Tom's theory has two. Consciousness exists and it evolves. Both Tom and Richard connect science and spirituality through their work. Their work is based on only two requirements for those who would like to learn more about it: open minded skepticism and experiencing for yourself, no beliefs required. They agree materialism is illogical. Richard has described materialism as a faith based science in his book, The Secret Nature of Matter. In Richard's book, the question asked of material scientists is, why investigate something after you've already assumed that it cannot possibly exist? Richard, you mentioned you've attended an event where scientists observed some of your demonstrations. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, I got invited. I'm not sure exactly why they invited me, but they like meeting people who are unusual. And somehow I got invited to a lab meeting at the University of Arizona with a whole room full of scientists. And they say, "Well, tell us about your work." So I said, "This discovery led to this discovery, led to this, and to this. And now I've explored the intersection of matter and consciousness in an empirically visible way." And they say, "What do you mean?" "Well, I can put consciousness into a physical object. And if I touch somebody with intent with that object, I can do two things at once that are both considered impossible." "What's that?" "Well, when a person has their hips twisted and their weight is balanced, no one has the physiological ability to untwist their hips. And the cranial bones, when you lift up on the base of the skull, that's called the occipital ridge, and it may be very uneven left or right. And nobody even has a method for aligning it with force, but I'm going to do both simultaneously without force by simply touching somebody with intent for a split second with an object I had meditated on." Now, this is the most unlikely thing you could possibly tell people, but I showed them how to measure, and you push down on the hips. It's like touching a tabletop. The hips just stop at a certain point, and they found somebody and he's off by a mile, and everybody agreed the right side was high in the back and the left occipital ridge was high. And I touch them and I say boing for two purposes: entertainment and to show that I'm not really concentrating very hard. So I touch them with this pendant that's pre-programmed to do that, and boing, and then they measure. And multiple people take measurements, and after 6 or 7 people had been aligned and multiple people had done the testing on everybody, They just threw up their hands and said, well, there's no doubt that this is actually working. And then they got very excited. And 4 of them said they wanted to research and publish. Then they started bragging about the special equipment they had. Number 1 person said he had this super ultrasound system that would be giving very accurate measurements. Next had MRI, the next had CBCT scanner and CT scanner. And then that last one had some other measurement I'd never heard of. And they were all talking about how they could get great measurements and were really excited. And then the first one said, but if I do this, I know I'll never get tenure at the university. And then number 2, 3, and 4, yeah, this would be academic suicide. They all agreed. And then the head professor said, I'm really afraid so, that there's probably not a single university in the US or Europe that would be open to these discoveries. And then he compared my discoveries to Ignaz Semmelweis, Gregor Mendel, James Lind, William James, Galileo, and others, who he said, I'm sorry to say this, but I don't think you're going to be known in your lifetime for what you found. And all right, well, but I think it was an eye-opener for me, because I was of this idealistic viewpoint of academia, that if they find a mystery that's clearly something they could study, and it could open up new pathways of knowledge for humanity, that they would say, well, that's what universities do, isn't it? And then I found out, no, it's about careers and politics and reputations and not about empiricism. And so as Rupert Sheldrake said, there's this, what do they call it? Intellectual osmosis that takes place. He's such an articulate man. He says, somehow through this intellectual osmosis, everybody comes to the assumption that materialism will explain everything. Math, physics, and logic will explain the whole reality. And anything outside of that is verboten, it's forbidden, it's taboo. Not allowed to look at that. So that was a very enlightening experience for me, to show people something they knew couldn't be true, and then have them acknowledge it. And then I got to see behind the veil of supposedly scientific impartiality.
Yes, thank you for that. Tom has run into the same thing in
No
searching for
doubt.
physicists to conduct his experiments. That consciousness thing really throws the materialists. His experiments have to do with the double slit experiment to show we live in a virtual reality. Um, and what materialists are doing is cherry picking. They like the idea of consciousness, but they want to cherry pick some things from materialism to draw that back into something that will, like as you have said, fly with the academics. So Tom, maybe you could explain, some of the part that you've experienced that Richard was describing.
Sure. Well, I've had many experiences just like Richard's. I mean, physicists aren't any different than any other group. They have beliefs, and those beliefs are shared. And that osmosis is really collective consciousness. They're political. It's about career. It's about position. And if you're a doctor or a lawyer or an Indian chief or any other, position or professional group, you're going to find a similar thing. People are invested in the status quo. That status quo changes, then it kind of pulls the rug out from under their feet and they don't know where to go next. And it kind of makes it look like they've been studying maybe the wrong things or not studying the right things all along. And of course, that's nothing that can be accepted. My experience with the experiments was that I did a money raiser with Kickstarter and got enough money to pay to have experiments done. And I thought, well, that should do it. Money talks, right? And so I went to several universities and asked them, physics departments, would you be interested in doing these experiments? Classical, I shouldn't say classical, they've not been done before, but knockoffs on double slit experiments that show kind of new things. And I found several that said, oh, sure, we'd be glad to do that. Tell me more about it. And as soon as they heard that C word, consciousness, suddenly they didn't have enough time. They, just weren't interested. Other things happened. They'd make a 180-degree turn there. And the reasoning, of course, is that they're physicists, and physicists study the objective world. And consciousness is subjective. Therefore, it's not a part of science. It's certainly not a part of physics. And any self-respecting physicist spends his time studying things that are not objective is basically thrown out of the club or given low status. So even though money was there, and I was in academia enough to know that when money is available, almost anything can happen in academia, because they're always scrounging for funds and for the next hit of money to help them fund their graduate students and other things, because the university only pays for maybe half of what they have to do. They have to get the rest in grants. So they're very eager to search out sources of money, but not if it had to do with consciousness. And even those physicists that were working in fields that were out on the fringe, like faster than light speed, transmissions and things like that, even the fringe guys really didn't want anything to do with that. So what's a physicist do when he can't find a university to do the work? He finds an engineer, because engineers can set up the same lab equipment, matter of fact, more easily, because almost all the lab equipment is just electronics boxes, which the electrical engineers are very familiar with. And engineers don't really care much about theory. They just want to know, does it work? So I didn't have any trouble at all with the first. After I gave up on the physicists, the first engineer I talked to was eager to take it on and thought, wow, this will be fun. Yeah, let's do this and see if it works. So they're in process and they're working. And it's not easy to get recognition within an established, what we call established field, I guess. Any field, that's the case. They all are very political. There's probably no place except government that's more political than education. Educational institutions are very political. And wherever you have politics, you have the right things to think and the right things to say and the wrong things to think and the wrong things to say. And if you're going to go up that ladder within those institutions, then you better think and say the right things. So it's sad, because I, like you, think of science. What is science? Science is the desire to find out how and why something is. And the most exciting and interesting thing in science is to find something that you don't understand, to find something that is new, something that is outside of what you already know. That should be, that's the candy, I would think, in science. That's the stuff that every scientist should be eager to find, but not really the case. They're eager for careers, they're eager for status and recognition and reputation. And all of that comes from being politically correct within their field, which means they have to sign up and defend the beliefs that are fundamental to their science or to whatever it is they're doing. And I suspect you find the same in medicine, and you'd find the same in any group of people. It's just the nature of us to be very self-centered and based in belief. That's just the way most of us are. It's not necessary, but it's definitely the majority situation, to be based in belief, based in ego, based in fear.
I'm thinking that what I want to see created, and I'm starting to put together a little coalition, and I think this is going to happen at some point, where we just have to step outside of that system. And I see a way to do that. given enough money, and I think the money's there for these kinds of discoveries, what you do is you create your own research institute that does massive amounts of research, but then you spend an equal amount on publicity, public relations, visibility. And when the people lead, the leaders are shamed into having to follow. And so it's sort of like what happened on the stock market recently, where all these young traders went against the hedge funds. We create enough visibility. We get the research done well, and then we challenge them through enough visibility. Well, you guys are ignoring this, so we're just going to publish it anyway and let you know that it's true. And if you don't want to study it, it's your loss. But some of them will try, and if they're honest about it, they're going to see what we're seeing. So yes, they're never going. What did it say? Science progresses one funeral at a time. Max Planck said that. So rather than wait for the funerals, we simply trade what we have through visibility, publicity, and good research to show them what's possible.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I started out, 15 years ago, thinking that the right approach would be a top-down approach. Take your ideas and send them to all the people who are at the top of their game, all the people at the best institutions who are working in the field and so on, because once they realize, what you've got, then it will spread quickly and you're home free. And
right.
After about 6 months of that, I realized that was absolutely the wrong approach. Stop sending people books that they're not going to read.
Yes.
Then I realized that it's really the bottoms up approach. Yeah. When enough people realize the truth, then we're going to drag the scientists along with us. They will come along. But now you have to, if you're going to talk to a scientist, you have to publish in one of their peer-reviewed journals. That's kind of an entrance for them. Of course, the peer review is where they usually impose the belief systems and politics of their field, but not always. So I was lucky. I got a year or so, 2 years ago, I got a peer-reviewed physics paper done about the experiments I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And I was really pleased at that. I gave it about a 1 in 10 chance, but it just went right through. And it turned out that publication got more requests for my research than all the rest of the publications that they had done, like in the last 4 or 5 years. So that's the thing. When you see that something is popular and that people are interested, that will gain attention much more solidly. And we do have to get their attention because people have understood the things that Richard and I understand for centuries. It's not like we're bringing brand new truths, to the world. You can go back 2,500 years ago and Buddha talked about this reality being an illusion. Well, that's what we're talking about. This reality is an illusion. And the difference that we would like to make, or at least that I would like to make, and I think Richard too, is that we need to get these concepts, these same ideas that have been around for a long time into the mainstream, because they've always been a little bubble of enlightenment out there someplace in the margins. And yes, they have a lot of followers. There's a lot of Buddhists and a lot of people who follow these wise people, and then their wise pronouncements get kind of twisted and molded into some kind of organization. But in any case, you need to get to the mainstream, because then it will become a mainstream idea. If it's a mainstream idea, then you're almost home free if it's a good idea. But if you're always relegated to the margins, then even if it's a good idea, it's really hard to break out of those margins into the very politically correct center. That's a tough transition.
This is why I'm wanting to create a hilariously funny documentary that shows what happens. It would be called the Galileo Project, and it shows what happens when you have paradigm-changing information before the world is ready to see it. So we're going to make it really funny, because anybody who's obstinate and refuses to acknowledge what they see through the telescope, so to speak, we just get to laugh at them. And anybody who sees it, we get to follow them and pursue their discoveries. And then you realize how people form their opinions and stay within certain camps. So this could be very fun, and it could be very popular too, because I got some ideas on how that could happen.
That
So,
sounds great,
but it's very
Richard.
hard to produce it at this time of COVID fear and shutdown, when you need to have access to a lot of people.
Well, you had something in your book where you described, I mean, we're talking about there's politics, there's academic careers, but you also mentioned the cognitive dissonance, which I think exists too.
Yeah, that's actually one of the lines I have in the script. I'd be a 3 foot tall character as a cartoon character talking to Galileo, and we're walking down the street, and I say, Galileo, why was it so hard to get people to look through your telescope? And the 7 foot Galileo says, well, you see, Richard, cognitive dissonance is a bitch. And I said, well, did you run into people like this? And we're going to use their voiceovers with cartoon characters. It isn't true because it can't be true. And then I said, you run into people like that? He goes, oh yeah, but back then they were wearing religious robes. Now they tend to wear white lab coats. We're going to make it really entertaining and fun.
That sounds great. Your description of cognitive dissonance is emotional resistance to deeply held beliefs and the observations that conflict with the edifice of their lives. I thought that was good, with the edifice of their lives.
What happens is there's 2 primary kinds of cognitive dissonance. Homer Simpson wants to eat a donut and lose weight. That's when your desires are in conflict with yourself. But the deeper, difficult one is when belief and reality are having a head-on collision. That's when the cognitive dissonance gets really bad, which is why I was shunned at the consciousness conference, because I'm saying, hey, you want to see something? No, go away. Don't show us this. This is not acceptable information for us to look at. So people didn't want to see it. And they even refused to publish my abstract in their book. Everybody's abstract was in the book, but mine was a blank page, because they knew exactly what I had.
Well, Richard, you've got so many people around the world who have experience or instructors in your quantum touch healing, and who see direct results. Like about a decade ago, I did take your course, and I was an instructor in quantum touch. But you have so much evidential things that with your connections around the world. Tom also has done experiments that are evidential too. Do you have any other stories about the evidence that you hope to show in this?
Well, I think it would be
documentary?
fun. This is a fun story. We could probably recreate it somewhere. But I went into a winery one time, and I asked the woman, I said, are you a wine connoisseur? She said, well, yes. I said, would you do me a favor? I've learned that I can change the taste of wine by running energy into it. She says, that's probably the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. And I said, well, would you humor me and help me get over my delusion that I have this ability? She said, oh, okay. So she pours 2 small glasses of wine. I don't know how they do it, but that's what she did. And then she handed me one glass, and I held it, and I meditated on it for about a minute or 2. And then I handed her the glass back, and then she tasted it and tasted the other one, and she tasted them twice. And she says, do you know what you've done? I said, tell me. She says, you've demolished the complexity of the wine, and you've nearly eliminated the aftertaste. And I said, is that good? And she said, no, that's very bad. So I teased her because she'd given me such a hard time, and I rolled my eyes like I'm a space cadet. And I said, if you like, I can charge all the bottles in here at once. And she slammed her hands on the table and said, no, don't do that. So it was so fun to see her go from the stupidest thing to don't do that in just a matter of minutes.
When we did these demonstrations, Richard, we took some cheap wine and made it taste better.
Yeah, I would do that in my classes. I would get the cheapest $10 gallon of wine I could find. I would be at my hotel room because I was traveling around the world doing this, and I'd open the bottle the night before so it would go stale by the next day. I'd have all my little Dixie cups, and people would we'd pour two little glasses underneath everybody's chair. And they'd pick up one of the glasses, they'd run energy, one of the cups, and they'd run energy into it. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I said, okay, taste it now. And people go, well, it's this, that, the other. And they'd say, well, it's okay. It's not great, but it's all right. Then they're expecting the other one to taste identical. And you could photograph their faces like it's stale, it's terrible, it's like awful. But it was such a dramatic shift. One woman said, mine is sweet. Let me taste that. You're right, it is sweet. Wow, you did something different. Now, I think that we're probably changing the hydrogen-oxygen bonding through this. Would love to see the exploration of why the taste changes on a physical level, but I don't have access to that kind of equipment or interested scientists to find that out. But it's another way of exploring it. There's so many different things that we've seen. We've seen it work on infants and animals and people under general anesthesia and plants and fluids. And we know when it works on all those things, it cannot be a psychological mechanism, because a lot of people are going to assume, well, you expect to feel better and your neck doesn't hurt. Well, these things just happen naturally, and they do. But not when you're working on an infant with severe fetal alcohol syndrome or severe brain damage. And we see both of these children becoming brilliant human beings who are fully functional and joyful leaders in their community. No, this is so far beyond the pale. And it's almost criminal that the stuff refuses to be researched, because these are real solutions that would improve the world in a dramatic way.
That I know that's true. I've seen a lot of that you've described, Richard. Tom, did you have anything that you wanted to share about what kind of evidential results that you've participated in or you've noticed?
Well, of course, I'm trying to produce some evidential physics research, which I haven't done before, but
That's right.
I have just tons and tons of, anecdotal or, experiences that I and other people that I have been associated with have experienced personally. And that's really what this is about. It's something that people have to experience personally. It's not something that you get to intellectually. It's something you get to by experience, by at least being open-minded enough to see how it works. Or it's not that hard. I mean, we think about, this stuff, you need to be a magician. You need to have, magic in your fingers and all that sort of stuff. No, you don't need to do that. The average person out there, just if he'd spend, not long, just a few hours, not even a few weeks, but just a few hours with his mind, he would amaze himself with the things that he can do, with the information he can get, with the abilities that he has. It's just that he doesn't have them in under control, in a way that he can access them whenever he wants to. But most people have these abilities. It's just part of being human. So yeah, there's literally thousands of amazing miracles that happen all the time that I and thousands of other people have experienced once we kind of go down this path of the intuitive as opposed to the intellectual. And that's the real evidence. So it's like, if you have problems believing this, well, just come on over and try it for a little bit and see what happens, you see. And again, we'd think that any good scientist would want to do that, but it's not even just a scientist. Almost anybody you think would want to join that. But then we get to the cognitive dissonance, which another way of looking at cognitive dissonance is that people have investment. This investment often, is rooted in belief, but they have investment in things being a certain way. And they don't want to come to the conclusion that their beliefs are wrong, that they have, done something foolish. So people will go to extremes to convince themselves that their beliefs are not foolish, and they're not doing things that are unprofitable. So it's kind of the backside of that same idea. Yes, it's rooted in belief, but it's investment, the way that I look at it. Like scientists are invested in materialism. So for them to say, well, I've been a physicist now for 20 years and all the stuff I learned is just wrong. It isn't right at all. My ideas are wrong. My approach is wrong. That's a hard step for somebody to take, and they will fight that. They will struggle against it. And if in the end, refuse to even look if it's shown to them, because the result is something they don't want to have to deal with. But just lots of experiences like that. People who, there was one lady that, as I recall, she was in a hospital. She had already been given her last rites. Her intestines were just bleeding, and they could not stop them from bleeding. They expected her to be dead in another, I don't know, half a day, few hours. And with a little mental effort, a day and a half later, she's out of the hospital, right back in the same, in the same place she had been before this happened. And there's lots of stories like that. I mean, there's thousands of people who are stage 4 cancer, 3 months to live, and a week later, they don't have any cancer at all. It's just gone. Why do those things happen? Well, science shouldn't stand still until they figure that out, rather than, weird stuff happens all the time. Yep, nobody knows why. Oh, well, let's go think about something else. If they studied those things, they find out there was patterns to it. There was changes in attitude more than anything else. Just changes in attitude made that difference. And or they had other people who had the ability to kind of change their attitude, had the ability to modify that future probability. Miracles are dime a dozen in this field, really. Matter of fact, you get to the point that strange things happen and you don't even notice and hardly remember, because strange things happen every day. Strange is normal.
I think you've both hit on a key point that it's your experience that's important. Richard is his whole program of quantum touch is set on letting the person learn about their love, how it's powerful, how your intent can heal. And also you, Tom teaches a program in our immersives that teaches some healing, some remote viewing, some communication, telepathic communication, and things like that. That's the key thing. That now I think that consciousness is in the word, and the concept of consciousness is in the mainstream. But here's where the cherry picking comes in. Tom's working on something called the logic of VR. We're going to do a little presentation with that. And consciousness and virtual reality, materialism and determinism. You can't mix those two. Is that right, Tom? I mean, this is where
That's right. Yeah.
scientists are trying to pick certain things.
Well, basically, if we look at it as philosophers, philosophically, you have two opposite points that kind of reject each other. There's no mixing here. They just reject each other. And in one corner, you have materialism. And if you have materialism, then you must also have determinism. Those two are logically necessary for each other. So you can't have one without the other. You have to be a determinist if you're a materialist. And otherwise, you're not logically consistent. And in the opposite corner, you have consciousness, time, free will. Okay, now, if you are in the materialist determinist camp, then consciousness, time, and free will are all imagined. They're not real things. They are all illusions. If you're in the consciousness, and free will side, then materialism and determinism are illusions. They don't really exist. But you can't be a materialist and also think free will is a good idea. Or you can't think that consciousness is a real thing, and so is materialism. You see, those two things in opposite corners are mutually exclusive logically. Yet, I think what Dawn is pointing to when she talks about her cherry picking is any number of scientists want to be in both camps. They say, oh yes, materialism is the way, but certainly we're conscious, and certainly we have time and free will. We have all those things, but I'm a materialist also. And they just don't realize that that is logically inconsistent. There's a problem with that. You can't be in both of those camps and still be logically consistent.
It's a conundrum. It's a terrible conundrum. And I just don't think they want to think that hard about what they're actually saying in that regard, because there's no way to square the circle. I think that what I'd like to say is that we tend to follow Hollywood, and Hollywood would have us believe that you've got to be special to do healing work. You got to be touched by an angel or a dolphin or an alien or the seventh son of a seventh son, or you have to have a near-death experience or struck by lightning or whatever the story is, or moths fly out of your mouth. I don't know. There's all these different things, or you have to give up your energy and sacrifice yourself. It's just complete horse stuff. What happens is this is the easiest skill that a human being can learn. And all we're doing is we're using breathing, body awareness, and linking the breathing and the body awareness together in waves, and then connecting it to your love and desire to serve and help. And we see people get well so fast of such a multitude of kinds of conditions. We like to say that it's all resonance and entrainment in principle, that the practitioner learns to raise their energy really high. That we're talking about the life force energy known as chi or ki or prana, many names. And we lift the vibration really high and we create a field of energy. And that field of energy then sandwiches or surrounds certain tissue of the body that's wanting to be healed. And then their body matches the vibration of the practitioner, and then their body and spiritual intelligence does the healing. And we like to say that the definition of a healer is someone who was sick and got well. And a great healer was someone very sick who got well quickly, because it's not us doing the healing. I don't know how to heal a cell. I don't know how to heal a cut. Way, way beyond any intellectual capacity I could ever have to know how a cell heals itself. However, if we hold the field of energy, just like I don't have to know how the gasoline runs a car, I just put the gasoline in, I just hold the energy field and let the mechanism and the spiritual energy do the work. And a lot of people are going to want to materialize the energy and say, well, you're just working with electromagnetism, and the life force energy that you're talking about is just another word for electromagnetism. That's the material viewpoint. And I say, well, if that's the case, doesn't electromagnetism fall off with distance, the inverse square law? The further it is, the less energy exists. And I can work on somebody on the other side of the world as easily as I can work on them if they're right beside me. There's no distance to this. Well, that breaks the whole model right there of materialism and science. If I can align 100 people simultaneously across the room by thinking about it and doing an out loud meditation for 7 or 8 seconds, like I did at the Smart Life Forum, I showed that you could align 100 people at once. University of Hong Kong and Macau, I showed that you could do a whole stage full of people same way. These are basic human abilities, but of course they're ignored until we get to the point. But what I'd like to say is that everybody can learn these skills if you're inspired to do so, because it's very easy if you want to learn, but not if you don't.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and it pleases me that we come from two very, very different approaches. We don't come from the same, from the same directions at all, but we end up in the same place.
Yes.
We use different words. I would not ever tell anybody that it's the field and the field raises somebody's vibration, and those are not my words. Those are metaphors that
Yes.
are very useful metaphors to try to explain to somebody what's going on. But in my viewpoint, there are no fields. There are no electromagnetic fields either. Those fields don't exist. They're a fiction. There are no electric fields. There are no gravitational fields. The whole idea of action at a distance is caused by a field is a wrong idea. It's materialism trying to explain things that are not material based. So, I see it in terms of consciousness. It's all about consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental. You don't have to have a cell heal itself. That's a virtual cell. It's rendered by a computer. It doesn't have to be sick. It can be otherwise, just by being rendered differently. So my approach is very different, but it pleases me, like I say, it's the way I started this. It pleases me to see, Richard and I from totally different places, and we spend our lives, we spend 30, 40, 50 years, working in this kind of a field, and we end up basically at the same place with the same understanding. We just use different words and metaphors and expressions in order to try to explain it to other people. But, everything that Richard says, sure, I'm nodding my head. Yeah, of course, that's the way it is. Yes, of course. And I think he feels about the same way, but yet we are not similar in how we got there, other than the fact that we were interested, we were pulled in by our curiosity, we wanted to understand, so we just kept taking the next step. All right, okay, I sort of got that, I see that, I got that under control. Now what's the next step? Where else does this lead? What else can I do with this?
Yes.
What's the causality here? What causes what? What is it related to? So we started in totally different places, totally different orientations, but we both were willing to take the next step to find out why and how and what, and not leave it alone, not walk away from it. So 50 years later, here we are, and we have found ourselves now to have the same understanding of the nature of reality and the way things work. We just use different language and different metaphors to get there. And it's the same with anybody out there. If you just experience, just try it, just get connected and work at it a little bit, you too will be able to get in the same place, because there are tens of thousands of pathways to the truth. And every path is a completely different journey, but there's only one truth. So if you keep working at it, you'll end up at the same place, because there is just one truth, but lots and lots of valid pathways to get there. So I think that's it's a neat expression of just how this works. That Richard and I, I'm a physicist, working at it from the science viewpoint, and you worked at it from the health services, viewpoint. I guess initially, how to heal, how to help people. Yeah. And so we end up with a very similar understanding, because that's actually the way the world works. The world is consciousness, and we are consciousness. And this physical reality is not the main thing. This, the stuff we do here in the physical reality, the physical stuff that is important to us, is not the main event. The main event is us growing up, getting rid of our fear, getting rid of our ego, getting rid of our beliefs, just being. Even if you don't focus that being on anything, just being authentic. That's enough. Just do that, and your life will change.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I feel like the thing that matters most to us is the love we feel. It's the common denominator. It's the purpose. It's the motivation of the consciousness. Because the material stuff, I mean, I've been living in Mexico for 3 months and I have one suitcase and I don't need much more stuff. I mean, I'm good. But it's the love that motivates all of us. And that is the common denominator. And that is the core, I think, element of the consciousness that we're working with. Why do we care? Why are we doing this? Who do we care about? And you know, it's fascinating to me. Did you see that documentary, My Octopus Teacher? It's a Netflix special. But you see, like for 100,000 generation of octopus, not one octopus ever received affection. But here's one octopus who gets a lot of affection and starts, quote, coming out of its shell and starts being affection. I saw it with like an eel in the sea, and this person's feeding it and petting it, and it's like a kitty cat going, oh yeah, I'd be affectionate. See, with so many different kinds of creatures in the world that have never had human affection, a tortoise or whatever it is, they've never in thousands of generations ever had affection, but they respond immediately to the love. So what is the point of consciousness? It's to learn about yourself, to become self-aware. Well, what is the self-awareness? What is the lack of ego? What is the being vulnerable all about? It's about realizing that it's all about learning about yourself. And when you learn about yourself, what really matters, and what really matters isn't the stuff, it's not the matter, it's the love. And I think that in lifetime after lifetime, that's what we're always learning, is to find the love. And one of the things that I really love about what we are both doing is we are choosing to find the truth wherever it leads, and to be creatively, and to have creative curiosity and not limit ourselves to what other people think our boundaries are, and to have fun, and to then inspire ourselves and be willing to take this out into the world and inspire other people. And so that's another commonality, that we just have that intellectual curiosity and joy to explore wherever it goes and find out whatever we can learn about it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you start a journey because you want to know. You start a journey because, like you say, you're curious and you're motivated, but it's about you, and it's about your learning and your growing and your understanding and your ability to dig deeper into the meaning and the significance of things. But then, as somewhere along that path of this being your mission and your thing you're doing in life, it turns out to be not really about you at all.
Yes.
It's about other people. So
Yes.
somewhere on this journey that with me started with, I want to learn how this works. I want to see, what I want to figure out what the forces are and what's significant here. It turns out from me wanting to find out to, it's not about me. It's not about me or what I know or what I find out. It's about what I can give, what I can do, how I can help. It's about other, not about self. So what starts as a journey of learning, the self-learning to be authentic, it's kind of self-focused, because I guess that's where we start from. That's where we begin. But then somewhere in the middle, it starts to change. And then eventually it's not really about self at all. Self is not all that significant. It's about other. And that's the love. That's how I, talk about love. Love is about other. Ego is about self. Fear is about self. But love is about other.
I have a couple of quotes from both of you about love, the consciousness and the love. Richard says your love is more valuable than you know. Your love has impact. Your love truly matters. And Thomas said, love is not just a nice idea, it's the fabric of our reality. So I think that's remarkable from both of you. And in these hard times, um, we look for solutions. How can we make a difference? Tom, in your book, there was a little paragraph about living in your culture and not being not being of it is exceptionally difficult. We are it. It is us. We're all integrally connected. Like it or not, we're undeniably part of the problem. Fortunately, we also have the potential to be the solution. The good news is that by developing the quality of our consciousness, we can become a much smaller part of the problem and a much bigger part of the solution. And I think that's what both of you have done for the world. Um, can I ask what, Richard, what is your hope for the future?
Oh, my hope for the future is that somehow the kinds of discoveries that we're making can be go mainstream, that that every child in all levels of school would learn to do healing work and become extraordinary by the time they got out, that this work would be studied at every university in the world and would be utilized at every hospital. I also have another system that took me over 30 years to develop to find emotional causation. And when people release those emotions, not only do the symptoms go away, but people feel incredibly grateful for having had the condition. And I've had psychotherapists tell me that that's all they really needed to learn in school. So I would love to see advanced nutrition, energy healing, emotional process work as the first line of defense for all health issues, and then use the heavy guns when you need to, but not use them as the first line of defense. And to see an entirely new culture based on the love and consciousness and solutions, to freely study all the solutions. We see that my work is utilized by physical therapists who say it transforms their practice, acupuncturists, chiropractors, physicians who say it transforms their practice, because it can be used with anything. But I don't have all the answers. I'm just figuring stuff out too. I'd like to see real research on all the alternatives, and then let's compare and find out what's actually working the best. I'm working on new discoveries right now. I'm so excited to continue doing my own studies on things that will just astound. Um, there's so much further to go, but my hope is that empiricism and lack of politics would allow us to progress as humanity, where we could really learn to get along and have fun and make this place so extraordinarily beautiful and healthy. And the answer, of course, is compassion, because there could never be a hungry child or a slave or an ecological disaster if compassion was our priority, not the accumulation of stuff, which is fear-based, but if love and compassion were, and by the way, compassion is defined as being aware of suffering and doing what you can to alleviate it. So if we made that our priority, I think the whole world would be so much better. So, just one step at a time, but it's about holding the inspiration and the vision and then seeing who wants to play.
That's lovely, Richard. I know, Tom, for the immediate future, you probably are hoping that the experiments will go ahead, because the implications for humanity there, well, you're best to describe that.
Well, yeah, that is certainly a main avenue for me right now, because, as Richard and I both said, this needs to go mainstream.
Yeah.
Because as long as it stays in the margins, it'll just keep, it's been in the margins for thousands of years, and it'll stay there for another thousands of years if it can't break out into the mainstream. And I think the process by which it's most likely to break out into the mainstream is because the high priests of, I used to say high priests of Western culture, but it's just the high priests of world culture, actually have to see it. They have to bless it. They have to say, it is true. And that is what will leap it into the mainstream. Now, in the old days, the high priests were the high priests of religion of some sort, and they told everyone else what to believe. They were mainstream. Those beliefs were mainstream. Today, the high priests of world culture are the scientists. Those are the high priests. They tell everybody else what to believe. When science says this is true, it'll go mainstream because then it'll be fact. Whereas if Richard or I say something's true, well, yeah, a couple of crazy old men out doing goofy stuff, and who knows what's going on there. It stays in the margins. Yes, there's thousands of people that surround each of us and that are very much a part of what we're doing and understand it. But thousands of people are not even a tenth of a drop, in the 7.5 billion of us bucket. And we can't make big changes. We're not going to see that vision that Richard has of people studying the things that matter, people being open-minded, people looking for bigger pictures and not looking for political correctness. That won't happen until it gets into the mainstream. So I think physics is probably, because we're getting so close to physics actually realizing that this is a virtual reality, I think they're so close to seeing that it won't be but another decade or two before they come to the point of understanding that this is a virtual reality. And that's just better physics. Not because that sounds like cool philosophy, but because it's better physics. And I think that will start that ball rolling. And once that ball gets started, I think with a little luck, we're going to end up right where Richard described it. We're going to end up with people who have broken out of those chains of materialism. In fact, I'd say that the next big paradigm shift, which will be the shift to understanding that consciousness is fundamental and love is the answer, love is the solution. Almost whatever the problem is, love is the solution. And that, we will get to that only when we go mainstream. And when we do, it will just work itself out because the world is hungry for a solution that works. The world is waiting, has been waiting a long time. I think if you ask almost anybody, anywhere on the planet, well, at least let's say you ask, every single person of the 7.5 billion of us, I think a huge majority would, if you asked us, do you think we're doing fine? Do you think humanity is like at the peak of its game and we're doing everything about right? It's just, and most people would say, no, it's obviously broken. Our social systems are broken. Our economic systems are broken. The way we interface and interact with each other, the way we don't care about each other, the way we try to manipulate and take advantage, it's all broken. We need a better way. So we have a huge pent-up need for change. We just don't have any direction that people see in the mainstream to get there. But I think once the scientists kick off this VR thing, I believe that we can make that turn because the scientists won't want to go there. They're not going to lead us to a better idea. They're going to say, well, okay, we see it's a virtual reality, but that's as far as we go. We're not going to say anything else about it. But that won't happen that way because when they refuse to say anything more about it, other people will begin that thinking process. They'll say, oh, a virtual reality, then who's the programmer? Where's the computer? Which suddenly opens us up to a consciousness as the fundamental system. And all of that, I think, is a logical progression that probably won't be missed. So I see that as kind of our way out of the margins into the mainstream. So I'm trying to push in that direction. But it's not me doing anything that's really important. It's all of us. It's Richard and I and Donna and 10,000 other people who are also kind of nudging the world in the same direction, nudging bigger and better understanding. There's tens of thousands of people who kind of get it, but that's still not mainstream yet. But it's all of us working together is what's going to push it over the brink. Any one idea is just another idea to complain about. But when you have 100 different ideas all coming to the same point, all coming to the same conclusion, just different words, different expressions, different places where they started, then that has the potential to be very powerful if it can connect to that pent-up demand for a better world and a better solution, a kinder, gentler, more love-based, reality for us to live in. So I think it's possible. And I think we'll get there in the short term.
I
I
think
hope
you're
so.
absolutely right, but I have a slightly different vision of how that's going to happen. I think the materialists are going to say, yes, it's a virtual reality, but it's aliens or future humans that are the programmers, and therefore it's still a material thing, and they're going to still hold it in the material grasp. But what I see is happening is that there are groups of conscious people who are getting access to wealth and interest in creating a new world and create an alternate space where the scientists aren't going to want to change their stripes. But if it becomes so visible, if the solutions become so accessible and so real that they're shamed into having to look at it from a different point of view, and if the research is clear enough and the evidence is strong enough, then there at least can be a split between those willing to come along and those who are not willing to come along, because most of them are not going to change their stripes. I went to the consciousness conference in Tucson and just saw how they didn't want to look through the telescope, so to speak. They did not want to see evidence that would break or shake their old theories. But like I said before, when the people lead, the leaders follow. I like bumper sticker wisdom in that regard. And so we create enough of a movement of visibility where people can try it themselves. And oh my God, I can align a person without touching them with my hands. That's crazy. Except what does it mean? And the theoretician says, oh, well, consciousness is fundamental, and here's the physics to back it up. And it's a virtual reality, and everything is based on the love and the consciousness. Now we have some leverage, but it only happens when there's enough visibility and enough evidence that's being presented strongly enough, often enough. Like you take someone like Joe Rogan. He says that all healers are fools or charlatans, but only because he's never seen it. That was the argument against the existence of gorillas, because not enough people had seen them. But once he sees it, and once other people see it, you go, oh, you mean I can do this? Of course you can. Then it becomes mainstream. And so I'm looking for a little more guerrilla theater, so to speak, to bring it out there and not wait for the lords and ladies of science to give us their blessings, because I don't think they're going to.
Yeah.
I think we will do a little bit of an end run. We'll pass the ball 12 times till we get it in the end zone.
Yeah, I agree with that. No, I don't think the scientists are going to change their stripes either very quickly. I think eventually they will, of course, like you say.
They always do.
Yeah, they'll eventually come around in the end. But I would agree with that. It's not the scientists that are going to lead it. I think the scientists are just going to start it without any intention of leading anything. I see it as like this. There's this great big round rock up on the very top of a mountain, and the scientists are the little guys with the crowbars trying to get that rock to move out of its divot. They have no idea once they get it out of the divot what's going to happen to it, but they're just impelled to try to get that thing out of its divot. And once they do, there's no calling it back, because it'll start rolling downhill. So I think they will kind of be the thing that sparks it. But then I would agree with you. What's got to sustain it is the fact that the things we're talking about are real things, things accessible to real people. It's about us. It's not a a science theory. It's not a, you know, a social theory. It's
Yeah.
about people, who we are, what we are, things that we
Yeah.
can do, things that we can be. And that's got to be the, you know, that's got to be the kind of the force behind it. I would agree entirely. But I think those physicists completely unknowingly are going to pull the, what is it? What's the box that, you know, at the, I don't know. Is this an old Greek mythology thing? What do you open?
Oh,
Pandora's
Pandora's
box.
box.
Yeah,
Pandora's box there.
yeah, they're gonna pull the top off of Pandora's box without any idea what's going to come out of it. And I think that will help us see a bigger picture, kind of crack that materialism viewpoint that keeps everybody hemmed in, you know, and through that crack, we'll be able to pull it apart and widen it because of what you say, because it works. It is real and it's accessible to everyone.
When people really see how powerful their love is, that they can profoundly affect the people around them and change themselves, when they discover their sincerity and their vulnerability is their strength, we could live in an extraordinary world with
Yes.
incredible solutions in every kind of field.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very hopeful that this will prevail. Because why would we have come since we're generating reality, why would we create it any other way? You know, if you're going to watch a movie, what fun is it to see a wealthy young man who has every advantage in the book somehow become successful? That's not a good movie. A good movie is where the villain is to put you in the impossible situation and then you come out the other side. Well, this is our movie. And we have been pushed into a corner. And now it's time for us to spread our wings and manifest things that would be fantastic. So let's make it our movie, since it's all an illusion anyway.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. We will get there. I have no doubt about it. You know,
Good.
this is a process of consciousness evolution. And evolution is a slow process, but it is also a relentless process. And this process has been and is still taking us toward the very goals that we're talking about, toward, you know, becoming love. That's where we've been going for a long time, but ever so slowly. But we will get there because evolution is relentless. It never quits until you get there. Even if we go backwards for a while, that's okay, because we will chug right back out of that hole and keep moving forwards. And one day we shall succeed in making this a very beautiful, lovely, caring, compassionate, lovely place to be. So I know it will happen. It's the nature of evolution to get to it, to its goal, because that is the low entropy state for social systems. But how long will it take? Will that be another couple of millennium, or just a couple of centuries, or maybe a couple of decades? I think for the first time ever, we have all the things we need to make it be the next couple of decades. We have all the things in place. And now we just have to let it happen, help it happen.
I think with COVID and the incredible level of dissatisfaction that human beings are experiencing right now around the globe, the desire for something better is stronger than it's ever been. And we all know that when we've hit rock bottom, we're most motivated to create something new. And I think that we're, as humanity, are pushed into a corner where the financial systems are failing, that people are worried about their health and they're concerned about everything, that we are pushed into a corner where we're going to either implode or explode beautifully in terms of creating something new. And I'm voting for the latter, that we're going to open up to a whole new kind of reality that we're thrilled about. And I'm holding that vision for myself and the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think we're on the very beginning of something wonderful, and we just need to you say, hold that vision. Because if enough of us hold that vision, it surely will come to pass.
Exactly.
Well, thank you both for being a part of the solution and for bravely bringing more light and love into the world. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you, Donna.